He's a billionaire, a global icon, a self-made mogul who rose from the gritty stairwells of the Marcy projects to the penthouses of Manhattan and the stages of the Super Bowl. To millions, he's more than a rapper, he's a movement. A brand, a blueprint of Black excellence and resilience. He is J-Z. To some, he's the embodiment of hustle turned legacy, a husband to Beyoncé, a father to Blue Ivy, and a businessman with the Midas touch. To others, he's a symbol of how far you can go when talent meets opportunity and strategic silence. But behind the headlines, the awards, and the billion-dollar deals lies a story too inconvenient to make the press tour. A story that didn't get cleared by the PR team. A story whispered for decades in courtrooms, parking lots, and broken homes. Because one man, a young man named Rymir Satterthwaite, has dared to stand alone against the empire. He's not a rapper, he's not famous, but for over a decade, he's been screaming into the void for something most people take for granted: to know who his father is. And according to Rymir and his mother, the answer is J-Z. This isn't a rumor, it's not a social media stunt, it's not clickbait, this is a 30-year saga of alleged paternity, failed justice, and an industry titan who, for reasons yet unexplained, refuses to take a simple DNA test. Now, for the first time, a judge has ordered Jay-Z to respond to the case, not through intermediaries, not through dismissal, but directly under the authority of law. The question that's haunted Rymir since childhood is finally heading to court. But, as this case unfolds, it exposes something deeper: the underbelly of fame, the silent systems built to protect the powerful, the gates that slam shut on the voiceless. This is the story they never wanted you to hear. This is the battle they tried to erase. Welcome to the full, unfiltered truth. Welcome to Glimpse. Let's rewind the clock to 1992. Jay-Z wasn't yet a household name. There were no platinum plaques, no champagne deals, no verses immortalized in museums. He was Sean Carter, a 22-year-old streetwise entrepreneur, hustling mixtapes and maneuvering between Brooklyn and Philadelphia. And it was in that inner-city hustle, according to court records and sworn affidavits, that he met a sick girl named Wanda in Philadelphia. Wanda was impressionable. She had dreams, and when she met Jay-Z, she didn't meet a mogul. She met a charming young man with ambition in his eyes and charisma in his voice. Someone who made her feel seen, special. He allegedly invited her to his aunt's apartment in Brooklyn. They spent the night together. Wanda later claimed they used protection, but it failed. She became pregnant. She says Jay-Z visited her once, more, then disappeared from her life. No phone number, no address, no way to reach him. Months later, Wanda gave birth to a baby boy. She named him Rymir. At the time, Wanda was in a relationship with a man named Robert Graves, who was initially listed as the father on the birth certificate. He raised Rymir as his own. But the truth, like smoke, cannot stay hidden forever. When Rymir was just 8 years old, Wanda sat him down and shattered the illusion. "I don't think Robert is your father. I think it might be Jay-Z." For a child, that revelation wasn't just confusing, it was seismic, a personal identity crisis with no resolution. And so began a journey that would stretch across decades, state lines, and legal loopholes. As the years passed, the question grew louder in Rymir's heart: was Jay-Z really his father? Was the man on TV, the mogul married to Beyoncé, the same person who had once stepped into his mother's life and then vanished? The first step was proof, a DNA test. At age 16, Rymir took a test with Robert Graves, the man who had raised him, and the result was final. Robert was not his biological father. That test shattered the only truth Rymir had known. The man who had raised him was not his blood. It left one name, J-Z. Wanda confirmed it again. She had only ever been with Robert and Jay-Z. There were no other possibilities. But how do you reach a man as powerful, as guarded, and as legally fortified as Jay-Z? You don't tweet him, you don't write a letter, you go to court. And that's exactly what Wanda did. In 2011, she filed a civil lawsuit seeking child support from Jay-Z, not for money, but for acknowledgement, for validation, for her son's identity. The lawsuit was filed in Pennsylvania, but Jay-Z's lawyers fired back. They argued that Jay-Z didn't reside in the state, and therefore, the court had no jurisdiction. The case was dismissed, not because it lacked evidence, not because Jay-Z proved he wasn't the father, but because of a technicality. Wanda never refiled. She was exhausted. She was outmatched. But Rymir, he wasn't done. He was just getting started. Took up the fight where his mother left off. But he wasn't just up against a courtroom, he was up against a system. He filed again, trying to get Jay-Z to take a DNA test in New Jersey. But Jay-Z's lawyers argued he didn't own property in New Jersey, so the court had no jurisdiction. Again, the case was dismissed. Again, not because of lack of merit, but because of legal gymnastics. Rymir, now a young adult, began to suspect that the justice system wasn't just blind, it was being manipulated. He alleged that Jay-Z's team was using money and influence to keep the case buried. Court orders were lost. Lawyers dropped out, judges overlooked evidence, and then came the scariest part. Rymir said someone tried to kill him. He posted photos of his car riddled with bullets. He claimed someone planted something in his vehicle. He said he was pulled over and interrogated. This wasn't just legal obstruction anymore. This was intimidation. He felt like a pawn in a powerful game, one where truth wasn't welcome. But he didn't stop. With no other options, Rymir took his case to the Supreme Court. He didn't have a legal team with celebrity power. He didn't have publicists or press coverage. He had documents, receipts, and a lifelong question. But the Supreme Court said no. They said they didn't have the jurisdiction to reopen matters from the lower courts or to unseal records. Another door slammed shut. Still, Rymir didn't stop. He refiled in the New Jersey Superior Court, hoping that with the right evidence, a judge would finally listen. And that evidence, it included proof from Tina Knowles' own book, Beyoncé's mother, admitting that Jay-Z did, in fact, have property in New Jersey. That property could shift the entire case because if Jay-Z did have ties to the state, the court did have jurisdiction. And finally, the court agreed to hear the case. In 2025, something shifted. What had been a quiet case suddenly caught fire. The spark, a post by 50 Cent. The legendary rapper, never one to hold his tongue, reposted Rymir's legal update on social media, asking why Jay-Z was trending. And then, out of nowhere, Nicki Minaj joined in. She reshared the post with a cryptic message, "To God be the glory." It wasn't much, but to Rymir, it was everything. The silence was breaking. The industry's code, that unwritten law to never go against the kings, had cracked. Nicki wasn't done. She began posting about her own experiences, how she felt silenced, how the industry targeted her family, how her ROC Nation, Jay-Z's empire, had allegedly worked to suppress her freedom of speech. And then came Damori Hadley, daughter of ROC Nation, CEO Desiree Perez, who claimed she was institutionalized for knowing too much. These weren't random accusations. These were women saying, in different ways, that power had been weaponized against truth, against family, against freedom. And through it all, Rymir's story kept resurfacing. The system he'd fought alone for years was finally cracking. But support came with risk. According to Rymir's godmother and others close to the case, mysterious visitors began showing up. Late-night knocks on doors. People asking questions they shouldn't know. And most chilling of all, a warning allegedly relayed from someone in Beyoncé's inner circle, "Tell him to go away. Go away, little boy." It wasn't just the phrase. It was the condescension, the kind of thing someone says when they believe they're untouchable. Soon after, someone was caught on a neighbor's security camera trying to enter a back door of Rymir's property. No one knew what they were looking for, but the message was clear: you're being watched. Chapter Y. Deeper into the ROCP, JP. Why? Nicki Minaj's accusations weren't isolated. They were echoed and amplified by a name that few expected: Damori Hadley, the estranged daughter of ROC Nation CEO Desiree Perez. Damori released a raw, unfiltered interview accusing her own mother of abusing her position of power. She claimed that Desiree Perez had forcibly institutionalized her, not out of concern, but as a way to suppress internal family drama that could explode publicly and hurt ROC Nation's pristine image. She spoke of being silenced, gaslit, discredited. It was eerily familiar. To Nicki. To Rymir. To anyone who had ever dared to challenge ROC Nation's fortress. But this time, the whispers had turned into waves. Damori stated outright that ROC Nation didn't just protect its stars, it protected its secrets. And Jay-Z, she implied, had plenty. According to her, Nicki Minaj had long been targeted by ROC Nation for daring to be independent, daring to speak her mind, daring to be uncontrollable. She shared how ROC Nation allegedly undermined Nicki's marriage, harassed her spouse, and turned allies into enemies. Every tool of power and influence was used, not to elevate but to destroy. So when Nicki stood beside Rymir, it wasn't just an act of support, it was rebellion. One woman against an empire, and she wasn't alone. Anymore, the image of Jay-Z, carefully constructed, immaculately polished, was beginning to fray, and behind it was something darker, something people were now daring to name. Chapter Y, Rymir's Truth P. J.Y.Y. While the headlines spun and celebrities picked sides, Rymir remained calm, steady, focused. He wasn't here for entertainment. This wasn't a circus to him. It was his life. From his modest home, he gave interviews, sat down with reporters, released documents. He showed the birth certificate, the DNA test that proved Robert Graves wasn't his father, the court filings, the letters, the refusals, the threats. He told the story in simple, quiet terms. A boy who grew up without a father, who was told at age 8 that the man he saw on TV might be his dad, who spent decades searching for closure. "I don't want money. I don't want fame," he said in one interview. "I just want the truth." He was never trying to take down an empire. He was just trying to find where he belonged, and every door he knocked on was slammed in his face. But he kept knocking. Because in the end, the truth doesn't need permission to exist. And with each passing day, more people began to believe him, not because he shouted, but because he never stopped whispering. Chapter Y. The court decides why. J.A.Y. After years of silence, misdirection, and procedural shutdowns, something changed. In a New Jersey Superior Court document, the judge made a stunning declaration. The defendant, Sean Corey Carter, is hereby ordered to respond to the complaint filed by the plaintiff no later than July 18, 2025. That one sentence changed everything. No more hiding behind lawyers. No more dodging jurisdiction. No more silence. Jay-Z was officially in the legal ring. He had been summoned by law to answer for the claim he had evaded for years. For Rymir, it was more than a legal win. It was a spiritual one. A moment of validation. After all the intimidation, all the dismissals, all the years he was treated like a liar, a fraud, a publicity chaser, the courts were finally listening. It was a long-awaited moment of truth, but the countdown had begun. Would Jay-Z answer? Would he take the test? Or would he double down on silence? Chapter Y. Legacy on Trial A. J.P.Y. This case was never just about DNA, it was about legacy. Jay-Z has spent decades crafting a story, from Marcy projects to Madison Square Garden, from drug dealer to mogul, from local talent to global icon. He's a husband, a father, a philanthropist, a businessman. He dines with presidents and inspires generations. But what happens if that legacy is built, in part, on erasure? If the very man who rapped about loyalty, integrity, and fatherhood refused to recognize his own son, if he took advantage of a sick girl in 1992 and spent 30 years running from the consequences, the stakes are immense. Because if Jay-Z is found to be the father, and it's proven he knew all along, it would shake the foundation of everything he's built. The Carter brand, ROC Nation, his marriage, his public image, his empire, and the world is watching. This is no longer about one man and his son. It's about power, truth, and whether the American justice system can hold anyone accountable, even a billionaire. Closing pay. J. Pace. Why? So we ask you, is Jay-Z hiding a secret? Or is Rymir chasing ghosts? Why would a man with nothing to hide fight a paternity test for over a decade? And if he's innocent, why did it take a judge to force a response? Rymir says this fight was never about breaking Jay-Z down. It was about building himself up. If you're not my father, prove it. But if you are, you've ignored me for 30 years. And that's something the world deserves to know. Now the clock is ticking. July 18th, 2025. A date that could change everything. Stay with us as we follow the fallout, the courtroom drama, and the final chapter in one of the most controversial paternity cases in entertainment history, because at Glimpse, we don't just show you what happened, we show you what they never wanted you to see. Like, comment, subscribe, and as always, sip wisely.